Hi everybody, welcome to Beyond the Lines. My name is Sarah, I'm the artist by Pinselgeschichten, and today I'm working again in the Outlander coloring book, starting a new page. This one here with Geillis Duncan in her work area. And I'm gonna talk to you about why I choose certain colors, certain media, what I want to do with this page, where I plan to have my lights and my darks, where my light source in the picture is, and why I started with the foreground this time, which is so unlike me. So I hope you enjoy. Here we go, it's a new page, da, 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 da. And the text for it reads, it was on one of the fruit picking expeditions to the orchard that I first met Geillis Duncan. So this is Geillis, and if you have seen the show or read the books, you know she is a redhead and has a very light and fair skin, and this is pretty much her work room in her house. And she's, well, tending to some herbs and making them into medicine, or I'm not gonna spoil anything in case you haven't read the books yet or seen the show. So what I want to do today, I want to start with a foreground. Usually, if you have seen a couple of my videos, you know that I like to start with the background, but this time around I'm going to reverse my process, and the reason is that I do have something planned for the background that is a little easier to do when I don't have to work on top of it for hours and hours and hours. So I'm starting with the foreground, and for that I chose my Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils, and I will start by deciding where I want to have light and shadow. So here's a huge window, and physics tells us that light coming in here will have like a cone-shaped area where things are lighter. So between my arms there's the light section. Anything else around it is a little darker. So I'm going to keep that in mind while I start coloring my focal point, and the focal point is Geillis and the desk here. The candelabra and anything else is background. When it comes to the line work and the way things are drawn here, they're pretty similar with the thickness of the lines from the background to the foreground. So I can easily make the candelabra background or midground, and I could also make it the foreground, so the focal point. But I decided to just have the desk and Geillis be the foreground. The candle holder here is my midground, and anything else is background. So what I want to do first is color her. Usually I go from right to left to not smudge anything, and from top to bottom, but I kind of want to have her colored and out of the way for me to decide on what tones I want to use for the table and all the plants here. So I had just said she's a redhead, so I want to choose my pencils for her hair first, and I'm gonna make her a ginger redhead and not an auburn redhead, if you know what I mean. So I'm starting choosing my colors. I do take terracotta, that's for sure. I'm going to take dark cadmium orange for the lights, maybe. Yep, I'm going to add a little bit of dark chrome yellow, and then I'm moving towards the really dark shading colors, which is Indian red and sanguine. So these are my pencils, and I'm gonna sharpen them before I start working, because I don't want to go over the lines too much. I want to incorporate them, so the lines that the illustrator has given me. And I want to work quite precisely, and that is easier done, at least for me, when I don't have too much of a blunt tip on my pencils. This will be actually this really slow part of this picture. Colored pencils is a very slow medium, and it will take a while if you don't have an underpainting. Last week when I finished my Scottish Piper, I had an underpainting, and then coloring with colored pencils on top is a little quicker because I don't have to take care of all the white peeking through. So I'm starting off with the part that is lightest. And that is the back of her head. And it goes pretty much up here to her crown of the head. That is where the light hits. Then I'm moving on to my next dark color and putting it next to it, blending it a bit. So, oopsie, now I gotta be a little bit careful on where to put it. So I'm starting here next to my lights, and then I'm moving on to the terracotta, which will go here towards the front, and I will color the rest of the hair with the base tone of this terracotta and shade with my other two pencils on top of that. Just looks a little more brownish because there's no sunlight hitting this part of the hair. This is pretty much the shadow part, so no highlights, no nothing, because there's no other light source around it. The candles aren't lighted, so it's just anything from the window, any light coming through there that is lighting the scene. And I have decided not to have an off-scene light source. Sometimes I do that. If you look back at the videos for the surgeon's room, I did that. I had an off-frame, off-screen light source, but I'm not going to do that for this particular page here. So I'm going to start shading around her head, because anything in front is covered by the hair in the back, so there's even less light, hence I'm adding a darker shade. And same goes for this part here of the head. And I'm using the sanguine, the sanguine pencil for that. And I'm working with a very light touch, so that I can layer quite a couple of different colors again and again without getting to the point where the paper can't take any more pigment. So this is the very dark side here, and I'm just adding complete layer of the sanguine pencil. Now I'm getting to my really dark values, and down here there's quite a bit of that. And the same goes for this side of her head. This is all in the very dark shadows here. And then I'm starting to get a little lighter. I will blend the pencils together in a minute. But this is where her dark side, no, I didn't mean it like that, where there's shadows on her head. She has her head tilted forward. That's why I'm shading a little more of that Indian red color here. And there's pretty much only very dark color here. I'm keeping just a smidge of the lighter shade here because there's still a tiny bit of light getting to that section, but it's really not that much. So I'm gonna add some more of the terracotta or the sanguine pencil to that section in a minute. And I even need to go darker on the left-hand side here. So I'm going to introduce another pencil, and that is, oh, wrong one, this one here. This is Caput Mortuum Violet. It has a reddish purplish tint, which makes this a little more vibrant looking in comparison to me using, say, a dark sepia or a walnut brown on top. So I want to keep that redhead look, but I want this to be really, really dark. I'm keeping a couple of strands uncolored with Caput pencil because I want to add some more of the Indian red there. And that will give the illusion of somewhat of a highlight without being a highlight, if you know what I mean. So a little more of the Indian red. This is even still a little too light for me, so I'm going to take a reddish brown not my usual shading colors. Gonna take, what are you? Burnt sienna. Just add a bit on top here. This is not really darkening things as quickly as I like, but I need to keep my warm shades here. Don't want to go with my standard cool shading colors, which are the dark browns that I had just mentioned. For now, maybe just a smidge, but really I have to be very careful. And I'm taking the warmest shade I got with my very dark browns, which is the walnut. I'm just going to add it up here, because this is the darkest part of her hair there. Okay, that's enough already. And I had said I wanted to add a little bit of the sanguine pencil up here, because there's somewhat of a highlight, though it not being a real highlight. Okay, on to the top of her head. I'm going to, where's my Indian red? There it is. So I'm going to put in a little more of that. I'm going to layer a little bit of the caput mortuum here on top towards the left hand side. And tiny little bit of my walnut pencil, but just with the lightest touch I can manage, because I don't want this to look brownish. She's a redhead and I want to celebrate that for her. Then I'm moving on to my terracotta pencil and giving the midsection here of the crown another layer. Blending the darker colors together. I want to have this strand to stand out a bit, so I'm using my burnt sienna pencil, because this is a little more of a darker area. And darken up this part here even more. It helps to squint when you're when you want to make sure that you get the right values. So squint or very quickly cross your eyes. Don't do that for long though. So I'm giving my orange part another layer. And also bringing in another layer of the dark yellow. And more terracotta. Just blending. Lots and lots of blending. We're adding a tiny little bit of my sanguine pencil to that strand up here. Because again, I want things to stand out a bit. And then I can go on to the right hand side of her hair. Just gonna add my light colors in again. Then I'm moving on to the terracotta. There's gonna be a little more of the orange reflections here on that side. I'm going to switch to the sanguine pencil. And to the Indian red. And then I'm layering the cardboard mortuum on top. Where there's really dark parts on her head, like in between those major standout chunks of hair. And on top with a little bit of my burnt sienna. And on this section here, you can already see this is a very slow process. This is pretty much 20 minutes in and I just colored the hair, you know. So colored pencils, while being a wonderful medium for coloring books, is a rather slow medium. So if you want to take your time and treasure a coloring page that you're working on, you might want to use colored pencils for that, because it's an awesome medium for slowly working on a coloring page. Adjusting the left-hand side a bit. There we go. This is the hair done of my ginger lady. I have got to adjust my chair because I'm sitting a little too high and I'm bumping against the drawers all the time, which makes for a funny noise that I'm not really fond of. So hold on. Gotta turn my chair for a few rounds. You should see me. This is hilarious, I'd say. Ooh, now I'm a little dizzy. All right. Yep, that's better. Okay, on to her skin. Excuse me. She is supposed to be very light person, so very whitish kind of a skin tone. So I'm using Light Flash and Ivory. And then I need shading color, which is Cinnamon. And I will probably add a little bit of a darker color in a minute towards the left-hand side here, but I want to go with the light colors and get as much in as possible. So let's start where the light hits. So it hits here on the cheekbone. This is the very light part. And then it hits here on the arm. These are the highlights, like high highlights. And now I can go in and add the flesh tone. And I'm using a very light touch again. I want her to be almost appearing to have a translucent kind of a skin, very pale, very fair. And I'm gonna base coat her first before going in with any cinnamon colored pencil. We're getting to the darker areas here, so all of this is in shadow, so I can layer cinnamon on top. And I don't need to have my ivory pencil on this arm, I can go in with the light flash right away. And then I can start with my cinnamon pencil, very light touch only. So I'm starting here on her eyes. And all of that part here on the left hand side will be darker. And towards the bottom of the face, there's also a bit of a darker shade. And up here as well. And on her ear too. I'm going to shade very lightly with the light flash pencil here on this side, just like the bridge of her nose. And I'm going to blend the cinnamon very lightly though. Softest touch I can manage. Under the nose, here around the eye, and the rest is gonna get another layer of ivory. So on her face, I'm gonna use my sanguine pencil for the eyebrows. And what are you? Medium flash for the lips. It's a little more of a pinkish shade, but it doesn't look like she would be wearing lipstick. It looks quite natural still. And then I can move on to her neck and chest area. I'm using cinnamon, again, lightest touch. can go a little darker here where there's no light. And then let's go for the cleavage. There's going to be a tiny little bit of cinnamon here where the hair casts a shadow, and then I'm bringing in my light flesh tone. And back to the cinnamon, just enhancing a few shadows. Adding a little bit of a line here on her collarbones. Blending out those lines a little bit. And a little more of my light flesh tone. Like so. Then I can go on to the arm, and starting with the light flesh and switching to the cinnamon where I need my shadows to be. So anything facing away from the light source. Like so. And then the sleeve casts a bit of a shadow too. And it casts a shadow here as well, but I'm not taking the cinnamon for this part because this is the very light section of the arm. So it's enough to have a little bit of the light flesh there. I'm also planning to have somewhat of a yellowish light coming in, not a bluish light. So that works quite well with the ivory. Like that, and now I can finish the skin on the other side. So there's a little bit of light catching here, so I'm going to add a smidge of ivory on top. And the sleeve casts a shadow. And the shadow part is here on this area. Something like that. Because if you look at my hands again, yeah. And right here there's a little bit of a lighter section because there's not really a highlight, but there's still light bouncing off, so the skin is a little lighter on this section. And also here, because again, bouncing off. And also here. So this would be Geillis's skin, and now I can think and try to decide what kind of skirt I'm gonna give her, but I have to take a very quick pee break first. So let's think about the dress. Geillis is a rather not so subtle person, so I think she would wear something like a bluish purplish dress and have cream colored sleeves. So I'm starting with the cream and I'm giving it a little bit of a, wow, no, I shouldn't throw my pencils. So I'm giving it these two colors, the ivory, and for shading a little bit of the cream. So let's start with that. I'm actually using a little bit of white too because the light is hitting here. Again, I'm using warm light to come in. So I'm starting with my ivory, giving it a full layer. Of her shirt, and then starting with a bit of a highlight here, just adding some white. It's not really visible, but it makes for a very smooth surface. That's why I'm adding the white. More ivory here on the fold. And then I will put in my shadows first before coming back to the mid-tone. So there's a little bit of a darker section here. So here on the crease of the arm, and here on the hair, I'm going to add just a tiny little smidge of a reddish shade because the hair will tint that yellowish ivory shirt. So I'm going a little darker here. Using cream will also help with the yellow light that I'm planning to have in this room. So I'm adding that here and also on the sleeve. And going back to my ivory, adding more of that color. So there's a tiny little shadow here. But it's very subtle because, again, she's in full light on that arm. And I'm going to add a little bit of a very light, warm gray. To have these folds here be a little more prominent, really very, very little only. You really don't need much if something is in the full spotlight, so to say. But you need a little bit of a contrast, so a light gray with a warm tint is the perfect color for me there. So I'm adding a little bit here as well around the hair. It's super, super subtle. I don't even know if you can see it on camera, but it is there, trust me. And then I had said I would add a little bit of a reddish tint, and for that I'm using the terracotta pencil just here around the hair, because the light bounces off. By having that much ivory or cream color underneath, there is not a lot that the paper can take anymore. So it is quite easy to have just a little tint of color on the shirt, but not have it look too red, if you know what I mean. More ivory just to blend. There we go. This is the red arm. Now I can go on to her front. Those strings here. actually go a little darker with my gray, because this is in the shadows. So I'm taking gray number 4, which is 2 shades darker than the one that I used before. And there's no red bouncing off anymore, so I can get I can put my terracotta pencil to the side and move on to the left hand side of the shirt. Here I'm on this side, I'm not using the cream color so much, but moving on to the warm grays a little more, because there's not really yellow light bouncing off. There's still a bit, but on the sleeve here I will hardly have any cream color anymore. But I will use my warm grays instead to put in some shadows. Oops. So on with my base layer of ivory, because there's a little bit of light coming through here, but just on this side, not on the other one. And it really helps to put in your cone of light every so often and see where the light hits and where there's a complete shadow. So I'm gonna start with my darkest darks here. So the warm gray number 4. Putting that on top. I'm still using just a very light touch. I think that's quite important for you to be able to layer colors. Switching to my lighter gray. Just blending this out, and a little bit of ivory here with a tiny little tiny little touch of the cream. Now onto the edge of this shirt. Sorry for the background music. I try to again have that added out in post-production, but my neighbors are blasting their loud music again. Blending, blending, blending. And that is the shirt. Now for the dress, a complementary color to orange is blue. And since I won't probably have a lot of blue in the remaining part of the picture, I think she will stand out even more. So there will be a lot of browns and grays and greens here on the rest of the focal point and also in the background and such. So by having her stand out color-wise, she will be even more of a focal point. And I think a blue would be a very nice color, but I want to go a little more towards the warmer blues, having just a smidge of cooler shades in there, maybe like a purple-ish blue, but I've chosen Prussian blue, indigo, of course, and indanthrene blue. So these would be something, and for the highlight parts, maybe have a little bit of a cooler gray in there as well. So let's take cool gray number 3. And I might add a little bit of a purple too. Why not, actually? A warmer purple. Let's go with mauve. So these colors I think would make a nice dress for her. But I was sharpening my pencils. And I'm going to start with my light section so that I know what my lightest color is. And I very lightly want to use, let's start with the light gray, where the major light hits her, so that would be here on this part. And on this one here, pulls a little more into the front on this section, and this one here gets a lot of light. So this would pretty much be the light cone. Anything else doesn't have a highlight. So I'm just, oh, there's a little, no, the just a bit up here gets a highlight too, but just very little, because then her body is blocking the direct light. So I'm going on top with a very light touch with my Prussian blue. Give this whole bodice kind of a thing here one layer of Prussian blue. Now that I have that colored in, I can move on to the darker blues and purples and such. So I want to start with the shadow areas now. So there's definitely gonna be a shadow here. There's going to be a somewhat of a highlight, not really here. So I'm just going to give it a little more of a Prussian blue. I'm gonna disregard those wrinkle ribbon things here on top for now. Gonna get back to those in a minute, but I want to have the main bodice in first. I'm going to add a little bit of mauve, just a smidge. I'm just having that on the top part of the dress. You will see in a second why I do so once I move to my dark indigo. Which I'm gonna do now. So let's start here where there's the darkest darks. So I'm bringing in the indigo on top. Going back to a little bit of Prussian blue. And I'm bringing in the indigo from the bottom. And back to the indigo, to the Prussian blue, sorry. And there's a little more of a dark line here underneath her boobs. By layering the mauve and the dark indigo, I actually get quite the nice shade. And by not having the mauve as a layer on the lower part, it looks a little more bluish and a little more purplish on the upper part, and that I think makes for a nice contrast there. Just adds a little bit of interest and a very subtle way of shading and indicating where folds are and where the major shadow is and where there's maybe a little bit of residual highlight hitting. Going to add a little bit of the dark indigo on top here just to darken things up and indicate that those ruffles cast a shadow too. But I'm using a lighter touch when I pull in the pencil towards the center here of her stomach area. Like so. Onto the other part here. I want a little bit of a light blue underneath here of the highlights, just to have a little bit of an area where I can't very much layer anymore, and like that you can get a lighter section pretty much automatically. Of course, I shouldn't color my shirt blue, so I need my eraser because I went a little too far. Getting back with the cream color here. Just cleaning up my lines. A bit more mauve. And I'm also going to use the mauve here on these fabric folds. Onto the indigo to darken things up. And by layering these many kinds of shades and actually different colors, you can get a rather rich looking bit of your coloring page. And it will stand out because of the amount of different colors you layer on top. And of course it also stands out because I'm using colors that I'm not using anywhere else in my coloring page. Like that you can very well create a focal point that stands out on its own without you doing very much. Okay, I need a little more of the Prussian blue here in the center. And then I can move on to the ruffles on top. So I want my indigo for the inner section here. And I'm going to add a little bit of that very light blue for that small strip on the ruffles, just to have it stand out a bit. And then I will shade on top. So for shading, I'm going to use my Prussian blue. There's a little bit of a light section there, so I'm gonna keep the little part at the end with my light blue, because this is where the light hits. And I'm even going to add a little bit of the indigo on top. Still stands out, but it's darker so that you can see, okay, this is like really dark and there's a lot of shadow there. So on to the highlights here there's a little bit of a light blue on that part. And again, I'm shading towards the center, keeping a little bit of the Prussian blue here, because there's a residual highlight, as I want to call it. Woo! It just bounces of that little bit here, but that's not really a highlight. Like so. Gotta check the time. Okay. I definitely do have time to color the rest of her top. So I'm going in with my light blue, going over all the gray sections that I had colored. And then adding the Prussian blue. Adding a little bit of my, what's it called? Indanthrene blue. Just to make this look a little richer. I had this as my first layer already, but I want to add just a little more before going in with mauve and indigo on the shadow parts. Like so. And now onto the indigo for the darkest shadows. Going to add just a tiny little bit of Payne's Gray here on those lines. And also underneath that wristband, not wristband, it's almost like a belt, something like that. So I'm going to add a little bit of dark gray here too. And I'm gonna pull it a little further underneath the arm. There we go. Onto the lighter section, going in with indigo here where there's the shadow bits. And for the rest, I'm gonna fill in my Prussian blue. This is where the light hits. Got a little bit too far with my blue there, and also here on the skin. So I have to get back with the light flesh and also a little bit of cinnamon. More of the indigo down here. First a little bit of the light blue. This isn't light enough for my taste. And then I'm going to add my Payne's Gray for the darker section. And I will add a little bit to these lines here just to make them stand out a little more. Because those seams are there for a reason. Gonna pull that one shadow here a little further. And gonna add a little bit of that Prussian blue that I used on these lines here, but very little only. It's the same color that I used for my light sections, and it's just a very subtle kind of a, I don't want to say shadow because it's not a shadow, but it adds a little bit to the outlines here. I'm adding just a smidge of my light blue on my light sections, and that is the bodice and skin and shirt of Geillis. And next week I will come back and add the skirt, add that color, and bring in maybe some greens already for the leaves. I think I would have time for that, so I'm gonna give it a last squint, and I just saw that I need a little bit more of a shadow here. I'm using the light flash, not the cinnamon. Let's sharpen that pencil once more, so that I have a bit of a finer tip. And just going to add a little bit more of that dark yellow. I'm using a medium heavy touch for these tiny little details here. There we go. So this is the first part of Geillis Duncan. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I will get back to you there as quickly as I can. All the pencils that I used today will be listed on the accordant blog post, and you can find that in the description box below. My website is pinselgeschichten.de, and there's a blog post for every video that I publish on this show, listing all the supplies that I used. In case you watch this quite a little later than this is published, just go to the search bar on my webpage and enter the video name. You will be directed to the accordant blog post. Then you don't have to search a lot. And thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, I would very much appreciate you giving me a thumbs up. And in case you're new to the channel and want to see more, for one, peruse the channel. There's lots of art videos, coloring videos, board game videos, MS related videos, podcasts and vlogs. So just take a look and enjoy, and also click that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you get a message whenever I release a new video. thanks again. Have a wonderful day to do some coloring. Do something fun. Maybe this picture. If you do, post it on Instagram and tag me on it, because I want to see what your creation for this page is. Have fun. Take good care. I'm going to see you next Thursday. Bye.